when your greatest strength becomes your downfall. You know that moment when you realize the thing that used to work so well for you isn't working anymore? Maybe it's that communication style that saved your relationship 5 years ago, but now seems to push your partner further away. Or that work strategy that got you promoted, but somehow isn't landing with your new team. Here's what's fascinating, and honestly, a little terrifying. 2,600 years ago, the Buddha warned us about this exact trap. He said, attachment is the root of suffering. And he wasn't just talking about attachment to people or possessions. He was talking about attachment to our methods, our tools, the very things that once made us successful. That's what I mean when I say stop trapping yourself. Because every time you cling to what used to work, you're building walls around your own growth. The tool that once freed you can quietly become the cage that confines you. In the next few minutes, I'm going to share with you a story about how this ancient wisdom could have prevented one of history's most devastating military failures, and more importantly, how it can save you from repeating the same mistake in your own life, starting today. The perfect weapon that became useless. Let me take you back to France in 1929. The country was still haunted by the Great War. 1.4 million French soldiers dead, 4 million wounded. The countryside scarred beyond recognition. But here's the thing, they had won. And they won using a very specific tool: trenches, fortifications, defensive warfare. The whole war was fought over yards of ground, inch by painful inch, in those muddy trenches. So when French leaders sat down to plan their future defense, they did what seemed perfectly logical. They built the ultimate version of what had already worked. Minister of War André Maginot proposed a permanent defensive line. From 1930 to 1937, France poured massive resources into what became known as the Maginot Line. And it was spectacular. Over 400 miles of continuous fortifications, dozens of massive underground bunkers with air filtration, electricity, living quarters, even underground railways, thousands of artillery pieces, and retractable turrets. It was the hammer that had won the last war, perfected to an extraordinary degree. But as the title of this message reminds us, when what once worked stops working, you can end up trapping yourself behind your own walls. An ancient Chinese fable, marking the boat to find the sword, speaks directly to this fatal flaw. The story tells of a man whose sword falls from his boat into a river. Instead of diving after it, he calmly carves a mark on the side of the boat and says, "This is where my sword fell." When the boat finally docks, he uses the mark to find his spot and dives into the water to search for his sword, completely oblivious to the fact that the boat had moved on. The French had carved their own mark on the boat. They had perfected the tool that won the War of 1918, pouring their national treasure into a magnificent, static line. But the river of warfare had already flowed on. And like the man in the fable, they didn't notice they were trapping themselves to the past. They marked the spot of their last victory, failing to realize that the next enemy would never be found waiting in the same place. When lightning strikes, May 1940, war returned to France. But it looked nothing like the war the French had prepared for. The Germans didn't attack the Maginot Line. Instead, they unleashed something entirely new, tanks and planes moving together in a blitzkrieg, a lightning war strategy. They swept through Belgium and cut into France through the Ardennes forest, which French strategists had left lightly defended. Why? Because they believed it was too dense for tanks. They were wrong. France fell within 6 weeks. The Maginot Line, that spectacular hammer they'd spent years perfecting, never fired a meaningful shot. The war simply wasn't a nail anymore. And that's the danger, isn't it? When what once worked stops working, but we keep swinging the same hammer anyway. That's how we trap ourselves, not because we're lazy or foolish, but because we confuse familiar with effective. In the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna tells Arjuna, "You have a right to perform your prescribed duty, but you are not entitled to the fruits of action." What does that mean? It means we must act in harmony with this moment, not in attachment to what worked in the past. The Bible echoes the same wisdom in Ecclesiastes. There is a time for everything, and a season for every activity under the heavens. The French weren't wrong to build defenses. They were wrong to believe the same defense would win a different war. And that's the ancient reminder. When you stop adapting, you start trapping yourself. The success strategy that's secretly failing you. Now, I know you're probably not planning military strategy, but here's where this gets really personal. I remember when I first started my career, I had this one approach to solving every problem. Work harder, stay later, push through. And you know what? It worked brilliantly. I got promoted. I earned respect. I built a reputation. But then, life changed. I had a family. My priorities shifted. And yet, I kept reaching for the same tool, the same hammer. Work harder, stay later, push through. Except now, it wasn't working anymore. I was missing my kids' bedtimes. My marriage was strained. My health was slipping. And somehow, I wasn't even getting the same results at work. That's when I realized I had built my own Maginot Line, and life had simply gone around it. I wasn't protecting myself anymore. I was trapping myself. Psychologist Abraham Maslow said it perfectly. If the only tool you have is a hammer, it is tempting to treat everything as if it were a nail. This is called the law of the instrument, or more simply, Maslow's hammer. When you become too comfortable with a certain tool, you start applying it everywhere, even when it no longer fits. But here's the deeper truth. It's not just about the tool. It's about who we think we are when we use it. I'm the person who works hard. I'm the one who stays calm. I'm the problem solver. See the pattern? The tools that once empowered us can quietly begin to confine us. The Buddha warned of this through the idea of attachment. We cling not just to things, but to our methods, our strategies, our ways of being. And that attachment, even to what once served us well, eventually becomes the root of our suffering. So before you pick up that same hammer again, pause and ask yourself, is this tool still serving me? Or have I started serving the tool? 3 sacred questions. So how do we avoid this trap? How do we honor what worked before without becoming enslaved to it? The ancient teachers left us 3 timeless questions, 3 simple practices that can stop us from trapping ourselves behind our own success. Question 1. What season am I in? Ecclesiastes reminds us, there is a time for everything. The communication style that worked when you were dating might not work now that you're raising teenagers. The business strategy that launched your startup might not scale your established company. So pause for a moment. What season are you actually in? Not the season you were in, Not the season you wish you were in, but the one you're living in right now. Because wisdom begins the moment you stop fighting the season you're in. Question 2. Is this tool serving the present, or am I serving the tool? The Buddha called this skillful means, using the right tool for the right moment. He said, a boat is useful for crossing a river, but once you've crossed, you don't carry the boat on your back. That protective wall you built after heartbreak, is it still keeping you safe? Or is it now keeping you lonely? That careful, risk-averse mindset that guarded you in uncertain times, is it still protecting you? Or is it now keeping you from growing? Every tool has a purpose. But when the purpose changes and we refuse to adapt, that's when we trap ourselves. Question 3. What would I do if I had to start fresh today? This might be the most powerful question of all. A Chinese proverb teaches, "The man who asks a question is a fool for a minute. The man who does not ask is a fool for life." If you were rebuilding your career today, knowing what you know now, would you build it the same way? If you were starting your relationship today, with all the lessons you've learned, would you bring the same patterns, or would you choose differently? The truth is, every day is a chance to start fresh. You just have to stop carrying yesterday's boat. How to stop being a slave to your own success. There's a beautiful passage in the Tao Te Ching that speaks right to this moment. The hard and stiff will be broken. The soft and supple will prevail. The Maginot Line was hard and stiff. Impressive. Yes, but brittle. Water, on the other hand, is soft and yielding. Yet over time, water shapes even the hardest stone. That's your reminder. Be more water than wall. Your weekly practice, the one tool experiment. Here's your challenge for this week. Identify just one tool you've been using in your life. One approach, one strategy, one mindset that used to work brilliantly. Maybe it's how you handle conflict. Maybe it's your morning routine. Maybe it's how you make decisions or manage your time. Now ask yourself honestly, is this still the right tool for this season? Or am I just comfortable with it? Even Jesus challenged people to rethink the tools they'd turned into traps. There's a powerful example in the Gospels. The Sabbath, the sacred day of rest, was originally given as a gift, a tool to help people restore themselves and reconnect with what truly matters. But by Jesus' time, the religious leaders had become so obsessed with the rules about the Sabbath, they'd forgotten its purpose. They would condemn someone for healing on the Sabbath, for picking grain when they were hungry. The tool that was meant to serve humanity had become a master humanity had to serve. And Jesus reminded them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. What does that mean for us? It means your tools, your habits, your routines, your rules should serve your life, not the other way around. Your morning routine should serve your well-being, not become a rigid obligation that drains your joy. Your communication style should serve connection, not become a script you hide behind. Your work ethic should serve your purpose, not become a ritual you perform just to feel safe. The moment you find yourself sacrificing what actually matters just to maintain what's familiar, you've crossed the line. You've stopped using the tool and started serving the hammer. This week, I want you to experiment with one different approach. Just one. Not because the old way was wrong, but because wisdom isn't about perfecting a single tool. It's about knowing when to reach for another. Remember, rigidity looks like strength, but it's flexibility that endures. Building bridges, instead of walls. The tragic irony of the Maginot Line represented everything France had learned from the Great War. It was perfected to an extraordinary degree. Their mistake wasn't in learning from the past. It was in believing the past was a blueprint for the future. The Buddha, Confucius, the biblical writers, the Vedic sages, they all pointed to the same timeless truth. Wisdom isn't about finding the one right answer. Wisdom is about staying soft and supple, enough to meet this moment exactly as it is. Ask any plumber or electrician, and they'll tell you something surprisingly profound. You need the right tool for the job. It's never the same tool. A wrench won't fix an electrical wire. A screwdriver won't stop a leaking pipe. They carry whole toolboxes, not because they're uncertain. It is because they know what they're doing. Life requires the same wisdom, because the moment you cling to a single way of doing things, you stop evolving and start trapping yourself. So here's your challenge. Today, as you face whatever's in front of you, in your work, your relationships, your life, ask yourself one simple question. Am I using the right tool or just the familiar one? Before you reach for that same old hammer, pause, take a breath, and ask, what does this moment actually require? Not what worked last time, not what's comfortable, but what this moment right here truly needs. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What's one tool, one pattern, one strategy that once worked brilliantly for you but might need updating for your current season? Be honest, be vulnerable. This community exists to grow together, not to judge. And if this message resonated with you, share it with someone who might be building their own Maginot Line. Because sometimes the most loving thing we can do is help someone stop trapping themselves. Subscribe if you want more ancient wisdom for modern life. Every week, we explore teachings that have guided humanity for thousands of years and show how they apply to your life right now. Remember, the tools that brought you here may not be the tools that take you there. And that's not failure. That's evolution. That's wisdom. That's growth. Until next time, stay flexible, stay curious, and keep growing.